really a pleasure to be here and also to see many familiar faces. There are a lot of people that I love deeply in this room, so I'm really glad to be here and also to see you here. Thank you to everyone at Moore who's made the lecture possible, and to everyone who supported me in this fellowship. I'm about 1 year in, so it'll keep going until May or June. Especially I want to thank Rachel, who is here. Seeing you. Yes, who has done so much to make this fellowship work for me, and who's a really amazing artist. Later you can talk to Rachel. And also Daniel and Caitlin and Gabrielle and Melanie, Nicole, Ashley, Patty, Cecilia, and Jane. And a few special people in the audience that I want to talk to for a moment. Lee Claire, my partner, who's here. Amelia, my collaborator. Naomi, former collaborator. Walker, collaborator, who is a ghost at the moment. Alex, Billy, Jeremy, and other people who I'm sure I'll notice later and realize I should have said your name. You've inspired me and raised me as a part of a queer family in so many ways over the years. And I've been out of my undergraduate degree for around 11 years now. So it's interesting to look back and really see what has happened in 11 years, and some of you have known me through that process. Throughout this talk, I'll invite you to notice the feelings that are coming up for you. So you'll see this blue square a few times in the talk. When you see it, I want you to take a moment to be present with yourself. And also, I would be interested in you all making a noise together, because it's a very rainy, dreary day, and it's cold in here. So if you're open to that, making a noise when you see the square, it could be you inhale and then you make whatever noise you want when you exhale. Can you just raise your hands? I have a sense. Could be that no one's up for it. Okay, so if you're up, looks like we might even have a majority rule. If we're a vote, you might be coerced into it, but it's not. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But we're just going to do a practice. So you'll see this square. So if you want, you can notice what you're bringing into this room. Maybe you got soaking wet. Maybe you're feeling freezing cold. Maybe you're feeling elated. Maybe you're in love. Just feel that and inhale. Woo! Whatever you want. Anything you want. We'll keep doing that. So why are the topics of labor and economy of central concern for so many artists? As you heard a little bit or saw in the galleries, these are topics that come back again and again for me as an artist, but I'm not alone. Many artists are thinking about labor and economy. Maybe it's because so many of us spend thousands of hours transforming everyday materials into something that's never been seen before. Or maybe it's because we want to believe that we're in control of our work, that we have agency over our own labor. Or we believe that it is impossible to measure the immeasurable. Or maybe it's because art seems so expensive, as the Guerrilla Girls tell us, appearing as a luxury commodity rather than as a form of research. As artists, we often call ourselves workers. We make works of art, as Julia Bryan Wilson has written about, and as we see from the Art Workers Coalition in 1969, and then Temporary Services newspaper from 2009. As Lee Claire, my partner, writes, art is both the fantasy of the solitary self and, in its communicative potential, the utopian hope of transcending that individual selfhood. Art is a deeply contradictory category of commodity being, of reified social relations, and of the opposite, of social possibility, of genuine hope, of historical newness. Critical theory teaches us that the work we make always reflects the political economy that we live within. So what does this mean? Think, for example, that the real average hourly earnings of workers have not increased since the 1970s. How is this reflected in art? Of course, artists are working on political economy, whether it's Mel Chin, Wage, Christine Wang, Audubon Nakanga, or Andrea Frazier. But the economic conditions are shaping us in our work, whether we think about it or not. These historical forces, institutions and rules, community and media, and our intimate networks shape us, and they are shaped by the economy. Andrea Frazier reminds us that it's important to remember that our personal experiences and individual histories are only particular instances of the possible, of who and what it is socially and historically possible to be and do. So in my work and in this talk, you'll notice themes of group work and economies. Why care about groups? Here are 3 reasons that I care about connecting people and being connected to people. 1, we live in a country that does not value the arts at the scale I believe it should, where art is not a core part of most public school education. As artists, and most of you are artists so you know this, we raise each other up. We can't survive or thrive alone. So we build the institutions and the networks that we need in order to thrive and to exist here in this country. So this is how we're being impacted by historical forces and institutions and rules. 2, I was taught by my white ancestors to extract all I can, avoid conflict, and flee trauma. My parents fled abusive families. They taught me to distrust my neighbors and most people around us. I was told to flee when I saw key members of my family growing up, but I knew that there had to be another way. I felt the trauma that was lived in those spaces. And I thought there must be something in these historical forces and in my intimate network that could change. So 3, I'm continually learning in community how to trust, how to rely on others, how to heal the trauma of alienation in me and in the people around me. And in this work, I found home with people who are doing transformative organizing for economic justice in New York City and with artists nationally. So for me, the healing that we need is both personal and historical. It's both the intimate networks, the community, and the historical forces. Healing and organizing can go together. As I say with Alta Star, who's from Generative Somatics, a healer that I work with, I am a commitment to slowing down and staying with the realities, the pleasures and the pains of interdependence. And with that, I'm interested in trying to connect you to one another. We don't only need a monologue of me speaking to you. So I'd like you to turn to someone, if possible, that you don't know. You could just look behind you, to the row behind you, and just take 1 minute to talk to each other about why you're here, what you're interested in, if anything there resonated with you. So say hello to each other for 1 minute. It's very hard. I know you like talking to each other. Slowly, if you could move back to where you were, that would be amazing. Okay, so now you might know someone a little bit that you can find after this and talk to more. Okay. Thank you for doing that. Let's just take a moment to feel where we are. If you'd like maybe noises, you can do that. In my work, I aim to make projects that actively reflect their own conditions of production, to show and think about how they're made and how they circulate. I do this with printed matter, websites that are co-created with engineers and designers, objects, installations, and often collaborative invitations to join each endeavor. I like to think of this as aesthetic infrastructure, which asks art audiences to consider the role that artists might play in representing and remaking economies, again, in textual, digital, and physical spaces. Some of you might know this concept of the solidarity economy. Can you raise your hand if you do? Great, wow, good job, Tilly. Usually that doesn't happen. So the idea in the solidarity economy, a movement that is international in scale, is that grassroots practices of direct democracy and mutual aid can be connected together to form a base of political power. So it's this idea that something like a worker cooperative actually shares political vision in common with things like community currencies, housing cooperatives, credit unions, and land trusts that we could imagine being supportive of one another to build power together. And what excites me about this diagram and the concept and the movement is that the commons and cultural creation are hand in hand in this work. So if the commons means resources that are shared and managed by the people who use them, cultural creation is part of the management of the commons. So if you work in your studio as an artist, you might feel something in common with the DIY ethos, or if you work in a collective, you might see yourself there in the production section of the economy. For me, I've been excited to create barter networks with collaborators, including Trade School and Art Goods, which we could talk about later if you're interested, and to make community currencies, for example, at MoMA, with a cafe that you had to fill out a currency that said what you demand or what you desire in exchange for tea or coffee. I've also been involved in community financing for community land trust efforts with the New York City Real Estate Investment Cooperative, where we say we can pool our money to invest in buildings and land for local, cultural, and cooperative uses. So the idea is that cultural creation and the commons are always part of organizing for economic justice. And lately I've been thinking a lot about worker cooperatives and what it means to be in a collective space. These are some of the people that I've worked with in the past 10 years. And in all the work we've done together, I realized that we don't spend enough time, I think, thinking about collaboration. So you'll see me later in this talk talking about how we work together. And you can imagine all these people in different ways around tables, having long meetings late at night, after work, trying to figure out what to do together. One other framework that has helped me understand the range of things that I do is using this analogy of a tree. So if most artists are focused on projects, let's think of those as the shiny fruit, the thing that's short-lived and tasty or delicious, but doesn't last. It's something that you spend a lot of time on, but then it's done, it's sitting there, it's beautiful. But it requires the trunk of the tree, the platform, in order to exist. That's what holds it up. And this is a collective or an institution, some kind of long-term effort that allows that project to exist. And I've also been thinking about the practices that nourish the platforms. What are the daily things we do to make those trunks, the platforms, exist? So when I feel like I'm doing too many different things, I remember that the project needs some kind of long-term space or group to hold it. And that group, in turn, needs these practices of nourishment. So briefly, I'll describe a project and then a platform. When Patty told me about this panel that had selected me for the fellowship and asked, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be trained in conflict transformation in workplaces where workers do not have bosses, worker cooperatives, and I want to make sculptures, which might seem like very different things. When I'm in meetings, I often see this, or you could think of classes, anything that you're in often. Someone's confused, someone's asleep, and someone might be mad, hard to say. So could an object interrupt these inevitable antagonisms of working together? Is it possible for cultural creation and worker cooperatives to be in the space of art? Can a project exist in the field of art and in the worker-owned business sector? That's my hope. So once I knew that conflict transformation was the center of this work, I knew the meeting room would be my site of investigation, and that the tiles of the false ceiling would be the focus of my formal vocabulary and material studies. You can think of the kinds of spaces you might be in if you're doing organizing work. They often look like this. But you might notice now, everywhere you go, there are ceiling tiles above you. This room is unusual, but walk around. You'll see it. I've seen it all over more. I noticed this one. You probably know where this is if you go here, down in the basement. And of course, they hide the space above. So it's an interface between the systems that are installed above and the space below its surface. Rem Koolhaas famously showed this in the Architecture Biennial in 2014. And I'm interested in the ceiling as a limit or a maximum amount. You can think of a glass ceiling or a debt ceiling as something that's a space between the missing term and the dialectic. And now there are false floors. So this is where the cables run. So there's also a space below. And this has become a real obsession of mine, such that I wanted to design tables that fit ceiling tiles, think about nets that can come out of ceiling tiles, and ways that they could be folded up and carried. There's a print with one of the technical drawings, so that this object could exist in a meeting with a facilitator, but also in the space of art in a gallery space. Here it is with Esteban Kelly at a facilitation training on conflict with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. And different ideas. I'm just going to take you through all the ceiling obsession because I still have another year here. So this is, what if it's a book? What if it has Tyvek? What if it's a photograph in the ceiling? This is actually a long time ago. My first moment when I became obsessed with ceiling tiles, I secretly did a swap with a friend who worked at MoMA. And now offices have been reshuffled, and this person doesn't know that this work is about them. It stayed there. So this is secretly in what used to be the design area at MoMA. So what is possible when we gather? Could we use objects to notice that some people speak way too much, and some people are afraid to speak at all? Could we think or feel that we do have enough time, rather than that time is always running out? Could we notice how reliant we are on digital devices, always looking for an outlet? Could we think differently about time in terms of our engagement with one another and measure time with water rather than a traditional clock? What would it mean to 3D print these and put them in boxes the size of ceiling tiles? This is a text of an archival box that fits water clocks. What if there were some water clocks overhead? And so now I'm in a space of obsession thinking about how toxic ceiling tiles are and what if they were made with mushroom material. You can get agricultural waste, this substrate, and then inoculate it with mushrooms to grow sculptures like the head that you see, the bust in the net in the gallery. I'm also thinking a lot about the language of the colonial net and what it means to capture an object around a practice that is inherently specific and contextual and that can't really travel. So this is based on the Philadelphia colonial landing net frame. And this is where I am now with this idea of meetings and objects for meetings. You can play the game later if you like. It's important to me also that this is tested in many different places. So with the support of Moore, I've been able to get invitations to continue developing this idea. It's at the New School right now, where it's both in the gallery and in a meeting space. And also, this is where it will be, this is a test shot, it's in progress, at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where they moved an actual boardroom table into the gallery and installed this space. It'll also go to Brandeis next week, where it will be installed both in the gallery and with the University Ombuds. They're a facilitation group that works with conflict transformation on campus. And there I'm going to work with a group there at the Maker Residency space to create an open source knitting machine so that anybody could make a net if they wanted to, or a sweater, whatever you like. It's a knitting robot. And this is how it works. You can see the parts. So if that's a project, thinking about objects for meetings, what is a platform that sustains the existence of these objects? For me, I want to think about how I can expand discourse both in the field of art and with people who want objects for groups. Famously, Thomas Kuhn wrote about paradigm shifts in the structure of scientific revolutions. In order to recognize innovation, there needs to be consensus. Without agreement about a theory or a model, it's impossible to know when new knowledge has been created. So in the field of art, if I go out and start making objects for groups, but don't think about other artists who are making objects for groups, I'll just be a random person that isn't changing the field or deepening my work in dialogue with other artists who make objects for groups. So for that reason, in 2015, when I started thinking about this, I got an invitation to do a project at Cooper Union, and I decided to curate a show of artists who make objects for groups. I got to design the exhibition space and the furniture, and bring in artists like Kenneth Bailey and Judith Lehman, and many people. There was a rug, a 3-ing rug from Paul Ryan. Chloe Bath showed work there. Many people, including Esther Sayre, who are thinking about ways to convene, making really beautiful objects for groups. And it was a library where people could learn about these methods and practice them. I was even thinking about ceiling tiles then, made all of the furniture with the size of the ceiling tile, knowing that it would be repurposed in the future for some other ceiling tile function. So if you're interested in that platform, the trunk, you can go to this website, it's just studycollaboration.com, and if you have a way of working in groups with objects you want to tell me about, I can add that to the website quite easily. So the next time you see a ceiling tile, I hope that you'll breathe. And think, what is the platform that would go with the project that I'm making? What's the organization or the collective that might sustain it? And what practices are necessary to nourish that work? So to close, I'll remind you that I make aesthetic infrastructure, which asks art audiences to consider what role artists might play in imagining and enacting economies. I do this with printed matter, with websites, objects, installations, and collaborative invitations to join each endeavor. And again, when you see a ceiling tile, I want you to breathe and know that it's a false ceiling, that there's a lot of space above. There might even be a false floor, and then you can imagine something beyond what you see overhead. Thank you.